Reese with Adventures in Aging, and I'm here with my friend
Gary Vandenberg. Pam, it's great to be back again and want to thank our sponsor, Stridelight. Stridelight provides quality diabetic shoes, custom inserts, foot orthotics, all the lower extremity needs. For over 20 years, their commitment to exceptional customer service and quality products has allowed them to earn the trust of their customers. So ask your physician, a doctor, or podiatrist about Stridelight, stridelight.net. Pam, what are we talking about today?
So, Gary, have you ever experienced stress in your life?
You know what, Pam? I hate to say it, but both my parents died of stress. Can you believe that? And they died when they were 58 years. When they were 58 years old, and my father had a heart attack one Sunday morning. My mother developed cancer, and after they passed away, I remember I was a teenager. I was 19 years old when my dad passed away. And I remember going to the doctor and saying, what can I do, or what should I do to not have heart attacks or whatever it might be? And I remember him saying, your parents died of stress. They had a very stressful life. And I said, I don't want to die like that. And he said, well, then don't have stress. And I haven't had stress. I think I'm one of the most stress-free people I know.
After knowing you for so many years, I would agree with that. I don't see you get stressed out very much.
And I don't know. I've always focused on things within my control, and I think and we'll get into different things that relate to stress, but a certain amount of stress is important. I mean, we all need to get fired up at times when we have a big project or a big opportunity ahead of us.
Oh, it does. And stress, for a lot of people, even though at times can be helpful, there are so many times when it's such a negative force in someone's life that can actually leave them non-functional.
Absolutely. And it's almost like it shuts them down. And we'll get into that today a little bit.
So the prevalence of stress disorders. So the typical that we hear a lot of is the post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD. And this isn't just for veterans that come home from the war or from serving our country, albeit there certainly is a lot of those individuals that do experience stress. But it can happen to a lot of us when we have an untoward event that happens in our life, or something that leaves a strong impact that may not be so positive. Anytime we're reminded of that, anytime that we're in a situation that brings back a memory, a negative memory, we can feel that stress that we had at that moment all over again.
Oh, yeah, it's a real thing. I think growing up, I would just get over that. You know what I'm saying? And I think there's situations that are so traumatic that people will never get over that. And it's interesting. I was just thinking about that today. There's things that today we have diagnosis, we have diseases, and you can't talk somebody out of something that's a diagnosis or a disease, right?
Oh, I think I've mentioned this before. My dad was diagnosed with non-Hodgkin's lymphoma.
Right.
And he could not say that diagnosis. He could not verbalize that out loud. It made him so uncomfortable. So uncomfortable to say cancer. And just others talking about it with him would create a tremendous amount of nonverbal stress in him with those nonverbal cues. And so you're right. There are just words and memories and actions and other people's their performance that can absolutely trigger us.
Yeah.
Stress.
And there's things that happen in your life. I was thinking, I have a nephew this summer, and these are, I would say, somewhat positive things, but they kind of added up. He ended up getting through med school. That's a big stressor. He ended up moving, right, to a new career, new job. Ended up getting married, right?
Yes.
And, you start piling these things on. There has to be something that starts wearing and tearing at you, right, at some point. And I wonder what some of those top stressors are out there.
Well, I can tell you the first three that aren't truly even on our bigger list. So I've always heard that the top stressors in life were marriage, being a first-time parent, divorce, and money.
Money's a big one, isn't it? I mean, people think about how many people get really hung up on on money. And again, it's funny, and we'll talk at some point at a future podcast about motivation. And money doesn't bother me. I think when I got married, I just said I have a wonderful wife. I just give her all my money. I don't worry about money.
Let her deal with the money.
Yeah, she's all stressed about money, I'm sure at times. Not me.
Oh my gosh!
Isn't it funny how you can kind of? Well, I guess I was never motivated about that, but I agree with relationships like that. Job stability. I think people worry about their job, and if they're going to lose their job, that's a stressor, right? The economy's changed.
You can also be stressed at work if you want a promotion. You're waiting for that promotion. You keep getting bypassed. That can create ongoing stress at work, right?
Yeah. I think it's your relationship with your boss is probably a stressful situation at times.
Yes,
it's probably one of those things. It goes back to housing and how we're going to pay our bills and those types of things, like you're saying with money. But it's also where you're living creates stress at times. People live in different environments and just personal safety. I mean, there are people that live in dangerous places in nice neighborhoods. How's that sound? And, it's, sometimes you can be
afraid to come home, afraid to get out of their car.
Yeah. And those types of things.
Go for a walk at night.
And, and when you stop and think about it, some of the common symptoms, of stress, I'm sure, one thing that always comes up is things like energy level, as we said. It's fatigue, isn't it?
Gary. So depression, that leads into depression. Stress is a big cause and a big factor in depression.
And, when you stop and think about it, I think I see some numbers here next to some notes we got. When it comes to that fatigue and energy, I think 41% of people end up having that as part of their symptom of stress if they're just exhausted all the time, right?
Very common. And then 45% of the people have a symptom of irritability and anger.
Isn't it something? Yeah.
Yes.
And so, it's something like that. Lack of motivation, I think, is almost 40%, or 4 out of 10 people they're not interested in things. They've lost interest in everyday things. They've lost interest in people and lives and those types of things.
Well, Gary, one of the indicators is losing interest in something you once enjoyed.
Yeah. They used to be into flowers or gardening. They used to be into, visiting with friends and going out to dinner. And now they're not doing that. It's like, what's going on? In fact,
it goes back to the fatigue and low energy. Your body just doesn't have the energy to get ready to go out, or the thought of being in a public place with others or having to have a conversation, right? Communication. And it stresses you out to think about it.
And even muscle tension. I was thinking last weekend I went out to Mount Rushmore. We talked about me doing that.
Oh, what a great adventure.
And there was a state park near there, and I was driving down this like single lane off the cliff. My tires are hanging off the cliff type of thing when you're driving. Have you ever been on one of those roads? God. It's like one lane road, and cars are coming by me and mobile homes and all these things. And at the end of the little state park I was at, Custer State Park, I realized I'd been clenching my jaw so hard for the last half hour.
Your teeth were hurting.
Yes, my jaw was hurting, and it was all stress related when you stop and think about it.
Well, stress, we touched on it a little bit in the physical symptoms of stress, right?
Right.
The appetite changes, losing weight.
Gaining weight. People, they start eating potato chips and a lot of potato chips.
Oh, how many times have you heard people say I'm stress eating?
Oh, yeah. Right? I think I sometimes on weekends, I think I'm one of those weekend bingers at times going, wow, we've got a lot of food here. It's time to start grazing.
Can't get enough.
Grazing through the refrigerator to find what I'm really interested in.
And there's a lot of people that see their physicians because of varied symptoms, and the physician cannot determine a true legitimate reason, which even can equate to heart palpitations, arrhythmias, fast heart rates. A lot of people see their doctor for sexual problems, weight changes, constant diarrhea, constipation, and in fact, some real, legitimate diseases like colitis can be equated to stress.
Oh, and I think there's people that forget things. I think I fall into that sometimes. If I do get stressed, which I'm never stressed, but if I do, if I were, I think I have a tendency of forgetting things. You know, the little details and things that probably, or somebody will say something to me, and then it goes in one ear and out the other, and later.
Well, is it true that even conversations or that have an increased amount of message to them, or orders for you to follow, you get stressed out trying to follow them. To follow the steps.
Yeah, I'm sure there's been tests on those types of things. But I really wonder what the impact and the cost is of stress. I mean, there's got to be a number out there.
I happen to know that number, Gary.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. And American employers actually spend about $300 billion every year.
$300 billion?
Yes, $300 billion every year on healthcare and lost work days linked to stress. And up to 80% of workplace accidents come from stress or stress-related problems, like being too distracted or tired.
I believe that. When you stop and think about, the risk that people have in everyday things, if somebody makes a mistake by accident at work, I bet it could be traced back to something that they just weren't paying attention because they had some stressful thing going on in their life, right?
Right. And being in healthcare and working with a lot of nurses and nurse aides that are working countless hours, there's a huge turnover in healthcare right now. And we got some nurses that are working 16-hour shifts, some nurse aides that are working that, if not a little more. You don't know how they do it. First of all, it takes impact on your health in general, right?
Right.
To not get rest, to not eat well, to not exercise, but then you add on high stress work environment, right?
Well, and sometimes, and it's not always, social class, but people have complicated lives. They've got kids that have problems, they've got husband or wife that's got problems, they got the money problems. And they start piling up. Next thing you know, they start making mistakes. That's what you're saying, right? At work and they're doing so. And it's something totally unrelated. It's not that they're not wanting to be a good care provider. It's the fact that they got 90 other things that they're trying to shuffle at the same time.
Yeah, and unfortunately, that plays into a poor work performance. Not every employer takes into account work-related stress or employee stress or employee burnout, right?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So I'm sure that there's some long-term stress things that happen that probably shorten people's lives then, right? When you think about it?
Yes. So we touched a little bit on those, but legitimately heart disease, high blood pressure is a true indicator of sustained stress. Diabetes can play into that. And then, of course, we did talk about depression and then anxiety. You're an anxious person. You're always on edge, always either vacillating between depression and anger.
Oh, yeah. And, unfortunately, it leads to people taking into, substance abuse, whether it's alcohol or drugs or those types of things. And they get into that, and it could even proceed into even killing yourself, right? It gets so stressful.
Unfortunately,
totally unfortunate, and we don't wish that on anybody. So if you get in a situation like that, to our listeners, please, at any age, go seek help and support of the people around you.
Yes, and know the indicators. When someone starts isolating themselves, when someone is not involved in activities they used to be, when you start to see that their function is a detriment to their health and their well-being, it's time to intervene.
Right. Wow. Okay. So when you stop and think about some of the treatments that go on with, and that's what you're saying, getting some treatments, professionals, but even talking to a friend might help you get through with those types of things. But,
well, Gary, sometimes talking to a friend may make you more stressed out. It depends on your friend.
Right.
So you never want to talk to the friend that, that has that feeling of misery loves company.
Right.
Where they start agreeing with you about your stress.
Right.
But do find that person that's more calm and a more even type of personality, and that's a good listener.
Okay, wonderful. And so I think when it comes to relaxation skills, I think that's a great opportunity for some treatment that we should all benefit from. I remember in high school I tried transcendental meditation. I was trying to have out-of-body experiences or something goofy like that. But the whole idea of just learning to breathe differently, breathe up through your nose and out your mouth, I'm sure you've heard of that.
Yes. So I'm kind of into some of that, the meditation and the de-stressing techniques. Yoga is very good for stress-related conditions.
Oh, yeah. I can agree with that. Any time of exercise, walking, jogging, just moving can get you through. Or
being in nature, right? Just being in a very low-stress environment. Not a lot of people around, maybe taking moments for yourself outside.
Oh, yeah.
Listening to nature, even if it's just concentrating on the leaves rustling or the birds.
Wow.
Actually, anything that can take your mind away for a few moments reduces stress tremendously.
Yeah, absolutely there. Well, some time ago, I came up with this model I call it the Gary model on stress. How's that sound for you and for our listeners?
You've even kind of taught others on this.
Oh,
right?
yeah. And just recently I went over this because of some situations where I was doing some work, and I decided to go over this with the department heads. But I'll just start talking through it, and we'll kind of bounce back and forth. But really, stress starts because in some situation, a change has happened. Something has changed, right?
Right.
A new boss, a new regulation. In this particular situation, it was somebody that had tested positive for COVID at work in a nursing home.
Oh, that's stressful.
And it created instant stress, right? Yeah. And so, what do we do, right? It's those types of things. And what ends up happening then is that there's a natural thing, a process we all have in our minds, whether we do it or not. And it's like, I'm losing control of the situation. I'm losing control. I don't have enough information. Why is something bad happening to a good person type of thing?
And could it happen to me type of feelings?
Yeah. It's those types of things that end up because of change happening. And what ends up happening is I say we go down two paths. And the first path we go down ends up being more defensive and blaming at times. It's like, why is this happening to me? Right? Have you ever had that feeling? Like,
oh, yeah. And then you start blame shifting.
Right. Yeah. Well,
I'd be okay if it weren't for you.
And so what happens when it says, why is this happening to me? And, you end up with, as we said, those physical, emotional, mental symptoms, such as your heart pounding, indigestion, shortness of breath, sleeplessness, fatigue, those types of things. Emotionally, you end up being a little bit more irritable, hostile, nervous, those types of things. And even mentally, as we said, about loss of concentration, being disorganized, even negative self-talk happens for people. People look confused at times. And then what I found is people then, the next logical thing, and this is a negative kind of angle, this is the stress side of this equation, is they start pointing fingers. It's not my fault, it's your fault, right?
Right. And if you wouldn't have done that, I wouldn't feel this way.
Right. And they need to change, right?
Right.
I've said that before. I'm sure you've said that, and I hear that all the time. The company needs to change. The boss needs to change. Right?
If the company would only, if my coworker would only, if my husband would only.
Yeah, and then what ends up happening is it goes into, now they become the victim, right? I'm the victim here.
Yes, and that's exactly the pattern.
And then it says, and I see this all the time, then the victim needs to tell everybody that they're the victim, right? I'm the victim in this situation. It's everyone else's fault. It's not my fault.
Well, you know what that person's looking for is validation. They really want to hear another person tell them they're right.
You're right. You are the victim, right?
That's correct. Yes.
Yeah, and maybe they are, maybe they're not, but it's really, and I think the last two steps here is they get so frustrated. They say, I can't make the situation change. I can't make my boss change. I can't make the company change. And so they end up saying, again, it's that self-talk saying, I make no difference here. They're burned out. See
right. They have no energy to look inward to change themselves. Right.
Right. And
it's too much work. It's too hard.
And it can happen to doctors. It can happen to nurses. It can happen to teachers. It can happen to, grocery clerks. You know what I'm saying? People, and then they start going through this like blur of life, right? They wake up and go through it, because they can't make things different, right? The stress is so powerful that it goes.
The human mind is hard to change. So it takes an environmental change, right? It takes something to change in your surroundings to affect you to be able to change. And it takes you to dig a little bit deeper into yourself and then go into those methods of meditation and seclusion a little bit to reevaluate your activity and how you're reacting.
And so whenever I've gone over this with other staff members or people, I always say, I'd love to write a book one day called Beyond Burnout, because I think I've gone through burnout.
I think there is a book like that.
I should read it then, because I think I've gone through it about 4 times where I've been in a spot where I go, boy, how did I get here? And you can't you can't get out of there. You just have to kind of slowly work your way through this. But I'm sure, I'm sure our listeners have run into that too at various times in your life. It doesn't always have to be somebody that's younger or older. It just happens that you're in a spot that it's just you're going through the routine. And,
so you should focus on what I can do.
Right, and
what can I do, and not deal with the frustration, right, of what you're feeling, but more on the action of what should I do right now?
Right. And so the scenario I used recently had to do with 9/11. And so when September 11th happened, I was in Boston on the 11th floor of a building that I could see the airport at. And so as the world was going crazy, which it was, those first, my brain, again, it goes back to I was saying about that doctor, my parents' doctor saying, what's in your control, Gary? What can you control? You can't run down to World Trade Center. You can't save anybody there right now, right? You can't do anything, but what can you do? And my brain instantly went to, well, what am I in control of? What can I work on today? How can I get my mind somewhere else? And so I objectively said, here's A, B, and C. This is what I can do. Those types of things. And I always like writing things out. And sometimes, you hear things that people say, and if you write it out, it looks different. Does that make sense? I had a boss one time, and he used to say stuff to me all the time. And then I'd write it out, and I'd look at it going, he just wants me to do these 3 things. You know what I mean? If I just do those 3 things and take all the personality out, I can do those 3 things. That's all he wants me to do.
Simplify, right? Simplify the message to what the true meaning is of it. Take out all those nonsensical words and break it down to what makes sense to you.
Right. And it ends up being, and really the bottom line then becomes communication and trying to try different steps. And I guess what I always say is the bottom line of this is you have the choice of going down the route to be burned out when change happens, or the route of being frustrated. How's that sound? And obviously frustration is because you're trying things and they're not working yet. And I'm sure you've been in this spot. And I say it to people all the time, I know what I want to happen. I'm just not there yet. Have you ever said that?
Oh, I think we all have that. You see your path, but you don't see the end. And that's what becomes so frustrating. You know where you want to be. But I think what really happens, Gary, is people lose sight of the action steps it takes to get there. Or they don't take a moment because maybe they're in too much of a hurry to get there.
Yeah, and what ends up happening is by staying in that control, and that's what we're saying, is you have the choice of being stressed or the choice of trying to get in control and communicating, coming up with specific steps. And I say it probably every day to somebody. I say, break it down to simple. What is the steps? What order can we do it in? And I know just recently I was working with a team, and every morning what we do is we say, I say, what is the one thing at the end of today you'll say you accomplished? And it's so hard for them to do it. Isn't it funny? Because
because it's easier for us to focus on negative.
Well, and just say at the end of today, and I'd say to the business office person, what is the 1 or 2 things? And she would rattle off 50 things, right? I'd say, what is the 1 or 2 things?
She wants to give you more.
Yeah. What is the 1 or 2 things when you get in your car, you can turn around and say, I have a sense of accomplishment today. I got it done.
Yeah.
And believe it or not, just in like a 2 or 3 week period of thinking like that, people are starting to focus in on those 1 or 2 things, because I tie it in with my son, the landscaper. In fact, I saw him earlier today. And he's building away. I think I saw him because he said he wanted me to help shovel some gravel for a while. So I shoveled gravel for 2 hours. I'm getting too old to shovel gravel, by the way. And you know, at the end of each day, he can stand there and look at these works of art that he's done. You know what I mean? He can look and see the patios and the decks and the retaining walls and the landscaping. And in many people's jobs, you don't have that. You kind of just clock in, you kind of go through whatever tasks you do, and at the end of the day, you go home and how was work? It's one of those things.
A lot of people, Gary, don't take a moment to stand back and reap the reward of what they did do.
Yeah, and so, and I think the other thing that kind of came to light too is how when a situation happens, and we're in healthcare, so sometimes what happens is a state surveyor will come in, right?
Sure.
Isn't that a stressful
Very
situation?
Stressful. Yes.
Guess who's at the front?
We get inspected by the government.
Guess who?
Stressful.
Guess who's at the front door? I had this recently. Guess who's at the front door? It's the state surveyor, right? And so instantly, what happens is you have a choice. You can freak out. Right, I've seen that. You've seen people freak out and run down hallways and
run for the back door. Yeah,
and then, or else you just say, hello, how are you? And I kind of knew this lady was showing up, so I'd already set up a room for her. Right, I had a table and chair and everything, a nice clean area. And I said, "May I get you some coffee?" Those types of things.
Yes.
And you kind of
because you're just the nice guy. Well, everyone else is running around in a frenzy.
Everyone else was running down the hallways, but me. No, I'm just kidding. But I was trying to say, what can I do to be in control of the situation? Make her comfortable, make her feel welcome. Ask her what she needs, right? And kind of bring the volume down, bring the anxiety down of everybody, right? But what I was thinking, and it isn't to pat myself on the back, but when people act crazy or real stressed out, everybody else does too, right? Wouldn't you agree with that?
No, that's so true, because chaos brings on stress. Chaos, one person creating chaos, that chaos transfers to others, right?
Oh, yeah.
So when you have the even person, i.e. you, Gary, who is the even person, that can translate as well. That positiveness, right? That calmness.
Well, I've said, when you have a lot of experiences like you and I have, it kind of gets rid of the peaks and valleys, right? We've seen the highest points and we've seen the lowest points, and now we're kind of flatlining in some of these situations. How's that sound?
Right.
Because it really doesn't, it's not as dramatic, it's not the end of the world as you think, right? Because I've seen the end of the world a couple of times, and this isn't it. How's that sound?
Well, when you think of the worst thing in the world that could happen to you, right? I mean, death. Loss of a loved one.
Painful situations, yes.
Yeah. Is this that? Is whatever stress I'm feeling today that?
No, the answer.
So you've got to put it in perspective.
Well, it's similar to things that we've talked about, worrying, that people that worry a lot, and most of that never happens. Most of it's, kind of blown out of proportion and such. And so when you stop and think about it, I often think that laughter, I'm one of those that I just find great humor. And in fact, I was talking with somebody this week, and they said, well, how's it going? And I said, I could have the choice of being kind of stressed or just having a time of my life. And I'm having a blast at some of the things I'm doing right now.
Gary, you and I laugh a lot, right? You and I can find a lot to laugh about.
Yeah, and it's not making fun of people. It's sometimes just comical situations. I was just sharing with you before this that my plane got delayed last night. I ended up sleeping on the floor at the airport all night, right? What?
Right.
And how, it's just comical. It's like, hey, you could go over to this hotel and have a 45-minute stay and then come back to the airport, or, hey, I'm just going to lay down on the carpet here, right? There was other.
You got to have a good laugh over it.
Oh, it's good story stuff.
That reminds me of in college, my roommate and I, we would think we had stressful days, right? But when I look back now, did we really? But at the time, and my roommate actually came up with a activity for us, and that was, let's just start laughing. Over what?
Over what? Silly stuff.
Nothing.
Over nothing.
Because laughing is contagious. And soon, that silly little exercise, we'd be dying laughing.
Oh, yeah.
Right?
Oh, I can definitely see that. So, kind of to roll this into the last couple of minutes here, we've got some quotes here about laughter and things like that. It'd be good to share with our group. 7 days without laughter makes 1 week, right? Get it? WEAK rather than a week. 7 days without laughter. How corny that can be. How about
right?
you?
And here's one. A smile is the shortest distance between two people.
Isn't that a good one? Yeah.
Yeah.
When you stop, if you're ever in a situation, even a stressful situation, you smile at somebody, it lowers the stress, doesn't it?
Unless it's a sarcastic smile.
Okay.
It has to be a genuine smile. But I agree.
Yeah. In fact, talk about sarcasm. I remember this nurse, and she was so sarcastic, it was cutting, right?
Yes.
And I just laughed my head off. I said, I can't believe, I get your humor. It is so perfect. No one else gets it. Everyone else gets offended.
Yeah.
But sarcasm is an art form in itself. And so when you think about, that's another thing is humor is a wonderful way to prevent hardening of the attitudes. How's that sound? Hardening of the attitudes?
That makes sense. I thought you were going to say hardening of the arteries,
No,
but
attitudes, yes.
that could happen too.
Right.
The most revolutionary act one can commit in our world is to be happy.
There you go. And that was for Patch Adams. Remember, he had a whole movie about him and how to use humor and those types of things. Let me see. Comedy is a distraction, not an action. Humor takes your mind off the negative and turns it into laughter that's positive. And that was my buddy, Buddy Hackett, right? So,
Aww.
And so it's funny how those types of things. Do you got any other ones there?
Okay, so this one we've already talked about. Laughter loves company even more than misery loves company.
Oh, yeah. So, as we kind of talk about the whole world of stress, I mean, life's too short, isn't it, when you stop and think about it?
Yeah.
And
in these times, Gary, life is stressful.
Yeah, and
with everything that's happening in the world, it can bring you down. It can give you anxiety.
And I've just always admired people that just can hold up to very stressful situations and march forward and continue to kind of lead. Right? They lead the situation. Right. They lead other people. They set the tone. And I often said, and I say this to people all the time, I cannot afford the luxury of a negative thought. Did you ever think about that? We can't afford to be negative. Can't afford, isn't it? Oh yeah, cannot afford the luxury of a negative thought. So in closing, Pam, why don't you wrap it up for the group here?
Yeah. So Gary, at the end of the day, laughter is free, legal, has no calories, no cholesterol, no preservatives, no artificial ingredients, and is absolutely safe. So let's carry on with that thought in our mind. Well, Gary, we had another day. We're coming to an end, and I want to thank all of our listeners. Please subscribe, please share, and we'll see you next time. Thank you.